All right, fifth graders, this is Mr. Combs, and I'm going to lead you through Lesson 11 problem set. So, as we can see, the instructions ask us to draw our rectangle and our tiling. We're then going to write our dimensions and the units counted in the blanks. So my first rectangle, I see that it's 4.5 units long and 2.5 units wide. So I'm going to label this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label my whole number. So I'm going to show that that's 4 units. And then this little extra guy over here is going to be 1/2. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing for the width. As you can see, our rectangles don't have to be perfect. We're not robots. There's 2 whole units. And then that little extra guy down there is 1/2. Okay? From here, what we're going to do is we're going to write an equation out to give us the area of our rectangles. So I'm going to kind of think of this like an area model where I'm multiplying every single thing together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply my whole numbers. So I have 4 and 2. Okay, so I have 4 times 2. Okay, plus now I'm going to do 4 times 1/2. Excuse me. Okay, and then now I'm going to do 2 times 1/2. And then my final one, I'm going to do 1/2 times 1/2. And I'm going to put each of these numbers or fractions into parentheses. So I know that I'm going to do this first before I add. So we're going to do these first and we're going to add them up. The first thing I'm going to do, 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. Plus 4 times 1/2. Okay, so I can do this a couple different ways. I can add a 1 to that whole number and just multiply it straight across. I know 4 times 1 gives me 4. 1 times 2 gives me 2. Okay, so that would be 4 over 2, and we're going to turn that back into a mixed number or a whole number. 4 divided by 2, or 4 times 1/2, gives me 2. Same idea for 2 times 1/2. I want you to think about what 1/2 of 2 would be. So 2 times 1 gives me 2. 1 times 2 gives me 2. I know that 2 over 2 is going to give me 1 whole. Okay, and so I'm going to show that through there. Okay, and then finally I have 1/2 times 1/2. I'm going to multiply my fractions straight across. 1 times 1 gives me 1. 2 times 2 gives me 4. I'm going to add on 1/4. Now all we're going to do is we're simply going to add. 8 plus 2 will give me 10, plus 1 will give me 11. Okay, I have 11 wholes, and now adding on that 1/4, so 11 and 1/4. Okay, my area is going to be 11 and 1/4 units squared. All right, I'm going to show you a quicker way. All right, and I'm going to do this on my whiteboard. I know that area is equal to length times width. So I'm going to do this on my whiteboard, and I'm going to show you just the way we would do it using standard algorithm. Okay, I'm going to write the standard alg on my whiteboard. Okay, so I'm going to scoot this up here, and we're going to look at our standard algorithm. So once again, I know that my rectangle was 4 and 1/2, okay, times 2 and 1/2. 4 and 1/2 by 2 and 1/2. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to simply multiply 4 and 1/2 times 2 and 1/2. All right. In order for me to more easily multiply, I'm going to turn each one of these numbers into a mixed number. So I know that 4 times 2 gives me 8, plus 1 extra half is going to give me 9 halves. Okay, and then now over here for 2 and 1/2, I know 2 times 2 is going to give me 4, plus 1 extra half is going to give me 5 halves. Okay, then as we know, using fraction multiplication, we're just going to multiply straight across. 9 times 5 is going to give me 45. 2 times 2 will give me 4. We could leave this as our answer, but I'm going to turn that back into a mixed number. I'm going to start by thinking about how many times 4 goes into 45. I know that 4 times 10 is 40. Okay, 4 times 4 would be 44, so that's as close as I'm going to get to 45. And so I'm going to have 11 and 1 extra fourth to get me up to that 45. And since we're thinking about area, we're going to say units squared. So as you can see, when we do our standard algorithm, we get the same answer as when we're doing our partial product method or our tiling. Okay, it's up to you to choose which one you want, but I want to show you both. Okay. Moving on, this next problem, we're just simply going to do our standard algorithm. So I have 3 2/4 by 1 3/4. All right. Okay. So 3 2/4 times 1 3/4. 3 2/4 times 1 3/4. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up so I can just multiply straight across. I'm going to think about turning this 3 2/4 into a fraction greater than 1. I know that 3 times 4 will give me 12, plus an extra 2/4 is going to give me 14/4. All right. Going to do the same thing over here with this 1 3/4. I know that 1 times 4 gives me 4, plus that extra 3/4 is going to give me 7/4. All right. And now all I have to do is simply multiply across. I personally do not know my 14s all the way up to 7. So I'm going to do 14 times 7. 7 times 4 gives me 28. Leave the 8. Regroup the 2. 1 times 7 gives me 7. Plus 2 is going to give me 98. 98. 4 times 4 is going to give me 16. Okay, I could leave this as 98/16, but I would prefer that we turn this back into a mixed number so we have a better idea of what this actual amount is, right? So we know that fractions can essentially act as division. Our numerator is the number being divided. Our denominator is the number we're dividing by. 98/16, okay? When I'm thinking about this, I am going to think about how many times 16, it can't go into 9. So now I'm going to think about how many times 16 will go into 98. Just like we've been doing in the past with our division, I'm going to try 16 times 5 and see how close that would get me. I know 6 times 5 gives me 30. Regroup that 3 tens. 1 times 5 gives me 5 plus 3 gives me 8. Okay, so 16 times 5 is going to give me 80. I think I can get a little bit closer. I'm going to try 16 times 6 now over here up top. Okay, 6 times 6 gives me 6. Regroup that 3. 6 times 1 gives me 6 plus 3 is going to give me 96. So the closest I can get to 98 with 16 is it is going to be 6 times. I just did that math. I know it's 96. 98 minus 96 is going to give me a remainder of 2, okay? So now what we can do is we can rewrite this remainder as a fraction, okay? So I know when I'm rewriting my remainder as a fraction, the remainder is going to be the number I am left over with, or the remainder is going to be the numerator, okay, the number I'm left with, and then the denominator is going to be the number we're dividing by, okay? So my total answer for this one is going to be 6 2/16. And that's equal to the area. 6 2/16. All righty. Okay. Now we're going to move on to rectangle C and rectangle D. We're going to do the same thing where we're doing standard algorithm. We're going to multiply each one of these numbers. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label it 1 1/2 times 3/4. I know that area is equal to length times width. All right, so I have 1 1/2 times 3/4. Okay, 1 1/2 times 3/4. I'm going to turn that 1 1/2 into a fraction greater than 1. 1 times 2 gives me 2, plus that extra half is going to give me 3/2 times, I don't have to do anything to 3/4. 3/4, okay? 3 times 3 is going to give me 9, and 2 times 4 is going to give me 8. 9/8 square units, or we can turn that back into a mixed number. 8 goes into 9, 1 whole time, and 1 extra eighth to give us 1 1/8 units squared for our area. 1 and 1/8 units squared. All right, now we're going to move on to this next one, rectangle D. I have 3/4, labeling it as my length, 1/2, labeling it as my width. Now I'm just going to multiply across. 3/4 times 1/2. I know that 3 times 1 will give me 3. 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. I can leave it just like that since it's not bigger than 1 whole, and my area is going to be 3/8 units squared. So area is equal to 3/8 units squared. All right, that's all for lesson 11, problem set. First page. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And as always, when you're watching these videos, feel free to pause, or also just feel free to email or call your teachers with questions.